If you don't already have a Linux-based server, then you're going to have to sign up for one from your favorite service provider. For me, I'm going to choose Ionos.com. I've used them in the past and they're reasonably priced and have decent servers. For me, I'm going to use a virtual private server. So I'm going to come over here, select virtual private server, scroll down to the middle of the page, and you're going to see all the different server sizes that they have. For me, I'm going to choose the VPS M, which stands for medium. It comes with 2 cores of shared CPU, 2 gigs of shared RAM, and 80 gigabytes of hard drive space. For Perforce servers, the CPU and the RAM are not as important as the hard drive space. Anybody who's programmed in Unreal Engine knows that these file sizes tend to get a little bit large. So the more hard drive space you can have, the better off you're going to be. Now, 80 gigs is more than what we need initially. However, there should be enough space on your server in order to install things such as MySQL database, should you decide you want to integrate an SQL inside of your Unreal project. In either case, try to get as much value for the money when it comes to your hard drive space. So this is $4 a month for the first 6 months and then 7 months thereafter. You could probably find cheaper servers elsewhere, but this is adequate for me. So I'm going to choose configure. When it pops up, make sure the operating system you choose is Linux, as this is a Linux-based tutorial. For the operating system, I'm actually not going to use the newest Ubuntu. It's relatively new. I'm not familiar with it. And honestly, I am not quite sure if Perforce supports 22.04. I would assume it does, but I've used Ubuntu 20.04 and it will be more than adequate for what we need to do. So 20.04 is what I'm going to use. Data location, I'm going to keep it as the United States. And if you're using Ionos, they have the option to provide backup recovery service for an additional fee. I don't need that. You might for your own projects. Decide that for yourself. I'm going to choose no thanks. Once you're done setting up your server, go ahead and come on back and we'll move on to the next steps. Now that you have your server all set up, we need an SSH client in order to communicate with the server. For me, I'm going to use PuTTy. It's a free SSH and Telnet client for Windows. So if we select the link here from the Google search PuTTy, you're going to get download PuTTy. And then on the home page, you're going to get the link here to download PuTTy. So let's hit that one. And then here you're going to be presented with several options. Choose the one that's best for you. But for me, the first option here, the 64-bit for Windows, is the one I want. So go ahead and select this. When it downloads, go ahead and install it. It's pretty straightforward installation. And then when you're done, open it up and let's move on to the next bit. Now that you got the PuTTy window open, all you need to do is enter your IP address. By default, the port for SSH on a Linux server is port number 22. So just leave that open. By default, that should be open up on the server for you as it is. In order to save this setting, come over here to saved sessions and give your session a name, and then come over here and click save. And there you go. So now the next time you come in here, all you have to do is select EvoCore or whatever you named yours, select load. It'll load your IP address and then you're ready to go. Now let's click open. Once you open it up, you're going to get a warning here warning you that the server keys don't match. Make sure you trust the host, but in this case we do because it's our own personal server. So go ahead and select accept. So now that we're logged in through SSH, we have to log into the account. You should have been given a root password and account name. So the root name should be root. Hit enter. Enter the password that was given to you when you created the server. And once you successfully entered your password, you should be given access to the server. Although this is not going to be a Linux-based tutorial, more of a Perforce-based tutorial, there are some things within Linux that we have to accomplish. I'm not going to explain most of these in detail, but I will let you know why we're doing it and what we're doing. So first, it is probably good that we change the root access password. So type PASSWD space root. It's going to ask you for your new password. So go ahead and enter that now. It's going to ask you to retype your new password. So enter it again. And once you've entered it correctly, it's going to let you know that the password was updated successfully. While your server provider may have a default firewall policy enabled, I'm going to choose not to use that one. You can leave it enabled on your server should you choose. They should not conflict, but I'm going to enable the UFW, which stands for uncomplicated firewall, as a default firewall policy that you have on a Linux server. Let's check the status of it. Initially, it should be disabled. So type UFW status, hit enter, and it's going to tell us it's inactive, which is good. That is what we want, because if it was active right now without all the policies in place, chances are likely you would lose access to the server because we do not have the SSH protocol enabled, which is what the PuTTy program uses to log us in. First things first, we need to change a default setting. So type nano. Nano's a default installed text editor on Linux /etc/default/UFW. Now it's going to open up in here. So if we use the down arrow to scroll around right here where it says IPv6 equals yes, that's what we want. Just make sure that it says yes. If it says no, then go ahead and delete the word no and type in yes. This is just going to ensure that should we be using mixed systems, different people logging in the system, if they're using IPv6, that they have access to that as well. This will help us when we set policies. It will automatically set the policy for the IPv6 protocol as well. Hit Control X if you had to make a change. You're going to get a pop-up at the bottom of the screen that says, do you want to save this buffer? Press Y for yes, and then it's going to ask you to change the name of the file if you so choose. We don't want to change the name of it, so then just hit enter to exit out of there, and then we are good to go. Now let's just go ahead and close up all the incoming ports if there was any available. Let's just ensure that is the case. Type UFW default deny incoming. This is going to deny any incoming ports that are currently available. It's just going to shut them all down. Hit enter. It's going to tell you that the policy has changed to deny. And then likewise, let's go UFW default allow outgoing. So we want everything that is outgoing from the server, doesn't matter what the port is, it's going to open those ports by default. It's going to tell you that the policy has changed to allow. Now let's enable some of the default ports that we want open. Most notably, we're going to want the SSH, which is port number 22 by default. So you want to keep it 22 for SSH. That's the standard, but we could just go UFW. We don't have to know the port, just UFW allow because it is standard. We could just type SSH and it's going to automatically know which port. It's going to tell you that the rule was updated for both the V4 and the V6. Now it doesn't explicitly say V4, but that is what it is for. All right. So now the other one we want to do, most standard policies that come enabled have HTTP and HTTPS enabled by default. So let's allow those as well. So type UFW allow, and now you can type the ports if you want, which I believe HTTP is 80, or you can just type HTTP because it is standard. It will know automatically which port it is. Hit enter. It's going to update those. UFW allow HTTPS. It's going to open those up. So now we can check which ports are enabled. So UFW status verbose. It's going to tell you it's inactive. So now let's go ahead and enable it first. Even though it is disabled, let's just type UFW disable. It's going to tell you it was stopped and disabled. Now let's go UFW enable, and it's going to warn you that by changing to this policy, we could lose our connection. Now we opened SSH already, so we shouldn't lose connection. If you do, and you enabled the SSH protocol, then go ahead and just log back in through PuTTy and you should be fine. But we shouldn't get kicked out here. Type Y, hit enter, and there we go. We didn't get kicked out. So now if we type UFW status verbose, it's going to give us all the ports that are open. You see we got 22, which is SSH, 80, which is HTTP, and 443, which is the HTTPS. You'll occasionally see me with a clear screen. If you want to clear your screen, just go ahead and type in the word clear, hit enter, and your screen will be cleared. We'll come back a little bit later after we set up the server in order to enable the port so we can enter through the visual client. For now, let's move on to the next section. Now that we're ready to install our server, before we can actually install the server, we need to obtain the public key, download the fingerprint from the servers, and then verify that the keys we got are all valid. Once we do that, then we'll create a repository to install the software. First things first, all of these commands will be in a text file that is down in the description. You can download that text file. You can copy each command as we go through it. And in order to paste into Linux, at least using PuTTy, you just simply right click the mouse. First command, go ahead and download the public key. All right, there we go. We got the key downloaded. So next we need to obtain the fingerprint. Hit enter. All right. Now this next command is going to allow us to verify that the keys match from the authentic Perforce fingerprint. And you can see at the end here, it says echo true. So if we do match, just like in Unreal, echo means like a print string. It's going to give us a feedback of true. If we don't get this true, then the fingerprints didn't match and we have an issue somewhere else. So go ahead and press enter. And once it does, you can see here, we get the word true down there at the bottom. So that means our fingerprints did in fact match. So now we need to add this key to our public keyring. Once you have the command in, go ahead and hit enter. There you go. Okay, it was added to our keyring. Now we need to create a new file for the Perforce repository. So this is going to open up Nano, and it's going to create this file for us in this folder structure. Hit enter, and it's going to open up the Nano editor. So all we need to add, we just need to add a single line into here. Again, this is in the text file down below. Same thing as before. If you just right click in here, it will paste the information that we have copied into our clipboard. So now to exit, we push Control X. You can see down here at the bottom, you can see the little caret on top in front of the letter. That caret means the control. So Control X will exit, and any of these other ones. M, I believe M stands for Alt. So you can use Alt Q to go to previous, things like that. But right now, just hit Control X. You're going to see down at the bottom, it says Save Modified Buffer. Yes, we do. So hit Y. And then it's going to ask you for the file name. We already entered that in the beginning, so we don't want to change that here. Just press enter. And there we go. That file was now created. So now we can go ahead and download the Helix server software. Before you install software, you should usually do an apt update. So type apt-get update, and it's going to update any of the file packages that we have currently on the server. Once that's complete, we can go ahead and install the software. Type apt-get install helix-p4d and hit enter. It's going to read it, and it's going to tell you a little bit of information about it, how much space it's going to need. Just type Y and hit enter to install the software. If you get the screen that you see in front of you, then congratulations, the server is now installed. However, there's still some work we have to do on it. But first, take a look. It just gives you a brief description here in the boxes of what it did for you. It installed the Helix core server. It gave you a Perforce system user, gave you the command tool P4D-CTL to do some managing of the server instances. And it gave you the Helix command line client, as well as the command in order to run the configuration. So go ahead and get that command, and let's go ahead and enter that so we can configure the server and get it ready to use. So now if you type out or paste in the command, this will enable the script that will put us in interactive mode so we can set some configuration files within the server. Hit enter, and it's just going to give you a summary of the arguments passed. There's nothing in there because this is new. As we move through here, it's going to ask us a series of questions. In the brackets that you see there, like where it says master, that is generally the default for that section right there. Anytime you want to leave a default, just hit enter without typing in anything, and the default will be applied, but it is best in certain circumstances that you change and not stay default. The Perforce server name, go ahead and give it a name for yourself, and I'm just going to give it my name here. Hit enter. After running this script, you can go back and you can change almost any of the environment variables later down the road, but the most important ones are being set now. So now we've got the P4 root, and whenever you see P4 and a name all in capital letters, that is generally going to be an environment variable that is being set. So P4 root, this is telling you where everything is going to be stored, and that is a file structure it is going to be stored in. I want to leave it at that. You can change it if you want, but I'm going to leave it as that. Hit enter, and it's going to tell you that it doesn't recognize that file directory, so it's going to create every file structure that it doesn't have. Hit Y for yes, and it's going to create that for you. So now we've got the Perforce Unicode mode. Do not enable this unless you are very familiar with Unicode. Enabling this will not allow you to disable it, so you will have to delete your server and restart it from scratch if you decide you don't want Unicode down the road. You cannot disable this. Just go ahead and leave this off. Type N or just press enter. I'm pushing N just to confirm the fact that it is no, I do not want it, but you could just hit enter and it'll be fine. Perforce server case sensitivity, it's defaulted to yes. This means that it recognizes the difference between a capital letter and a lowercase letter. This is probably something good to have. That's why it's defaulted to yes. So I'm going to leave mine for yes, but if for some reason you don't want it to be recognized, then you can put that as no. I'm not quite sure if case sensitivity affects passwords or not. I believe it does, but don't quote me on that. I think it's just best to ensure that it's set. Press enter or hit Y. Now it's asking for the Perforce server address for the P4 port. It's giving you the default example is SSL, which is a secured socket layer, and the port of 16 1666. Now you can disable SSL. There's different protocols that you can have. You can totally escape and not include SSL. Even if you don't have a SSL certificate on your server, you can still run the SSL port, and I recommend that you do that. Otherwise, you can just disable it by excluding it from the port address, or you can do TCP if that's a protocol you want to use, whichever. I think TCP is default if you don't include anything on there. However, I want to do SSL. I may or may not include my SSL certificate on this server or not. I have not decided yet. That is a much more difficult thing to do, so that might be a different video down the road. However, what we need to do here is type your protocol. So I'm doing SSL : make sure you enter your address here. Now, if you have a domain name for the server you created, then you can use that here. For me, I don't have a domain name, so I'm just going to use IP address and then with another colon. And here is the port. It's defaulted to port 1666. I don't like that port, so I'm going to change it. I'm going to go 1667. You can do virtually any port that you want to do as long as it's within a valid range. And that valid range is anywhere from 1024 all the way through 32,767. There are a lot of ports, as you can tell, with like 2280, 443. Those are all predefined. So generally, you're not going to run into any issues using any port within those ranges I just gave you. However, try to stick close to the default if you can. But if there's a specific port that you know you want to use, then go ahead and just enter that there. For me, it's 1667, and we will go back to UFW and enable this port in just a little bit. Go ahead and hit enter once you have that set, and then it's going to ask you for a super user login. This is the super user. Remember, with the Perforce free version, you are only allowed 5 users within the server before you need a license to operate that server. For me, I'm going to have a few people on my server, so I don't want to use up one of those licenses. So I will end up using the super user. It's good practice with anything to not have super user or administrative privileges to do daily tasks. However, because of the limited licenses on here, I will be. That's something you're going to have to decide for your own server. So either way, give your super user a login name, hit enter, and then it's going to ask you for a password for that super user. Go ahead and enter that here. Then it's going to ask you to verify by retyping the same password. Once you've done that, it's going to run through and it's going to set up all these information for you. So go ahead and read that. So a little bit of information. It's ran the fingerprint. It didn't recognize the fingerprint, so it ran a P4 trust on the port that we entered there. Created the user because there was not one already there, and it set the current security level to a level of 3, which is high. 4, I believe, is the highest you can go on there. And it created a ticket for the root user, which is essentially just a cookie. So you get a limited amount of time with that ticket open where you don't need to re-enter your user password. And then the rest of the information there tells you the P4D configuration has completed, and it just gives you a little bit of more information. There is one last configuration that I want to set up. This isn't something strictly necessary, but I'm going to enable this because this will allow, if there's a mixed environment with protocols like IPv4 versus IPv6, as well as I believe when we enable or when we log into the server from the visual client on your computer, that you won't have to actually use the protocol type. So SSL, you shouldn't have to type that. You can just type the IP address and the port and then be able to log in. But without this configuration being enabled, you will have to type SSL. So let's go ahead and enable this. So type P4 configure set net.rfc 3484 equals 1. Hit enter, and it's going to tell you for server any configuration variable net.rfc 3484 set to 1. So now it's enabled. So now this should allow us from our client to not include SSL every time we want to log into the server. All right, so let's move on to the next step. Now we need to edit our Typemap. Typemap is a server-wide setting that determines how files are handled by the server. The Typemap only affects files that are added to the server after we set the Typemap. So it's super important that we get this set up before we put any of our project files onto the server. By default, Helix attempts to auto-detect if certain files should be stored as text or binary data. So it's important that using the Unreal Engine, we specify which files come from there, since they have their own special file types, that we tell the server how to store and use the various these files within Unreal Engine. When we go to edit the file in the Linux server, it defaults to using the default set text editor, which for Linux is defaulted to the Vi editor. I do not like the Vi editor. It is difficult to use. I prefer Nano. Nano's not much better, but if you've ever tried to use Vi, it is actually leaps and bounds different. There's still a lot with Nano that is left to be desired. However, given that we're in a command line prompt, it works pretty well. So in order for us to change the default editor, we need to change the bash file. It's a super important file that's hidden and generally you can't get to it or see it real easy without the proper commands. Just make sure you are in the uppermost root folder of your server. That's where the file lays. So what we need to do is you type nano. We will open it up in the nano editor, ~bash rc and hit enter. And there we go. We are now in the nano editor for the bash rc. Do not change anything in here. Hit the down arrow only, scroll all the way down to the very bottom. We can hit enter a couple times, give us some white space. That is fine. And the commands we need to change, we need to put export and then in all caps, editor equals single quote, nano, single quote, hit enter, export, visual equals single quote, nano, single quote, and that's all we need to change within this file. Hit Control X. It's going to ask you to save the modified buffer. Press Y. And it's going to ask you if you want to change the file to write to. We do not. We want to keep it the same as it was before, and hit enter. There we go. So now whenever we have this, we should have the default editor. However, it won't take effect until either you log out of the server and then log back in, or you can simply type source space .bash rc. That will reload the file. So now if we start to edit the typemap, it will load up in the nano editor. So let's edit the typemap by typing P4 and then typemap, hit enter. And there you can see the file has now opened up in the nano editor as indicated there at the top of the screen. You're going to see it's already pre-populated with a bunch of information in here. Most of this is going to be fine. It's irrelevant to us what we're going to end up pasting in here. But there is a few that will conflict. So we need to go ahead and delete those. We could change them directly, but as I said, down in the description, you will find that link to all the information that we're going to be putting in everywhere here. So I'm going to give you a list of all the stuff we're going to add here. However, we need to change a few of them, as I said. So come up here down to where it says, just hold the down arrow and then just use your arrows to navigate. We need to go to the lib, the .lib here, the .lib files. We need to change this one. So let's just go ahead and delete it. Just hit the backspace. And then now we have the DLL. We need to go ahead and delete this one as well. And then the one right above it, the .exe. Let's go ahead and delete that one. Just backspace until it goes away and the lines are cleaned up. Now, if we go up here to the BMP, this one will conflict as well. So just go ahead and backspace over this one. We are going to re-enter these, but it's with different information. Instead of binary plus L, it's going to be binary plus W, and the BMP is not going to have any flag on it attached. The rest of it looks pretty good. So now if you go down to the bottom of the file, the white space here before doesn't matter. You can put this in however you want. After you save it, if you load it back up, which we will do, you'll see everything will be perfectly aligned. So go ahead and copy all the new information we're going to have in here, and then just right click and it's going to paste everything. So as I said, you can see it's got the extra space in here that we're not too worried about. You can see here, we put in the new binary. It used to be plus L, but now we changed it to plus W. We deleted them just so there was no conflict. And from what I could tell, none of these other ones are being used up here. So we should be good to go. If there's any other that you recognize that is already in here previously, then delete the previous ones and call it good. But this looks all right. So hit Control X. It's going to ask you if you want to save the modified buffer. Press Y for yes. And then we don't want to change the name here. Just leave it as the default and press enter. There you go. You can see it says typemap save. So now if we go back in, type P4, typemap, go back in there. And now when you scroll down, you're going to see all of the stuff that we entered right here, starting right here with the binary.exe, and it already aligned everything for us. So this just tells the P4 server how we want these handles to be done. Plus L means it will lock these files and it needs to be checked out. Plus W indicates that it will be a writable file at all times. These indicate that it will be a text, etc., etc. The S here indicates that it will only keep one of the most current versions of any of these files. All right, so that's it. Control X, we didn't change anything, so it's going to tell you right there, typemap not changed. So now the last couple things that we need to do in order to finish this up is we need to add the port that we entered there into the UFW. So whatever port you entered, I'm going to do UFW allow. For me, I did 1667. If you did a different port or you kept it default at 1666, then whatever that is, go ahead and enter that there and then press enter. It's going to add the rules. Let's double check UFW status verbose. And there you go. You can see that it has been entered in both the V4 and the V6. And finally, the last thing we need to do, we need to set another environment variable. We need to set the P4 ignore. So let's go P4 set P4 ignore. Remember, all capital means it is an environment variable. Hit equal. And then the name of the file we want to change, you can change this to pretty much whatever you want. The standard is for Perforce, they use .p4 ignore. You can leave it at that, or you can do just .ignore or whatever. If you're used to GitHub, they have .git, or they use just .ignore as well. You can do a .txt if that's what you want. However you lay this out here is how your file needs to be. Traditionally, it doesn't have the .txt at the end. We will delete that when we actually create our ignore file, but this is the name of the file itself, and it's going to look for this. The reason why it's prefaced with the period is so it shows at the top of a list. So P4 ignore, .p4 ignore is the one we will use. Go ahead and hit enter. And just to verify, type P4 set. It's going to give us all the environment variables that have been set. And you can see there P4 ignore equals .p4 ignore. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining me in this video. If you found the video useful, please go down, hit that like button. If you're new to the channel, think about subscribing while you're down there. And in the next video, we're going to download the P4V client and we're going to set up our database and install some files to start using source control with Unreal Engine. All right. Again, thanks for joining me. And until the next video, peace.